serviced and included in a rental system that we manage before it ends up having to be. I don't know if anyone's seen what's going on like in Detroit and in Cleveland, but they're bulldozing whole neighborhoods because, if you're not careful, people will come in and take the fixtures and the copper and the metals out of the house. But the challenge there for us is that as we begin to lose housing stock, it will also drive up the cost of the remaining housing stock, which will in effect exacerbate the cost and the homelessness issue because you make it more expensive. Before that stock becomes too badly deteriorated, it might be good for us to look at how do we incorporate that and actually place people in it who we've screened in such a way that you have a sense. So if I've got a mother and 3 children and they're living in a shelter, perhaps they're better off in a subsidized house that a housing authority maintains. It was the concept initially of Section 8, but Section 8 assumed that you were going to have private investment to cover that. Now that we have this disproportionate number of houses that are falling out, we may need to reconsider how you incorporate that at a low cost. And in some instances, if it's taken by a government agency, in some of the cases, you'll find that they're foreign-owned conglomerates that just bought a whole lot of paper. And it might be that they could just take a write-down on the value by investing with the government and lose the fees. But again, you'd have to be careful that it's a program managed well. But for some of the people, you're just talking about getting them into a facility that's going to be stable, and some of these might fit that. But, I mean, there are a couple of things as people are looking at long-term stable is an oxymoron when you're looking at budget volatility and a decrease in the housing stock. But I didn't mean to take.
Well, thank you. We'll look forward to anything that comes forward. I wanted to take a few minutes and respond to some of the recommendations that Housing California gave and brought up, which thank you, Senator. Thank you so much for joining us. And just kind of respond to some of the issues of the day that are out there that we're grappling with already. I think of all the discussion we've had, we know in terms of legislation that we all probably support Assemblymember Fong, and we're going to keep pushing on the Interagency Council bill. There may be a few others. You referenced Steinberg's bill related to housing to kind of catch the affordable housing dollars that we stand to lose as a resource come February 1st because of the dissolution of redevelopment. What I would say is that obviously the Senate has put forth a piece of legislation. The Assembly is looking at it. We have a working group on redevelopment issues, and there's so many tranches of issues there. I'm on that group. Ms. Mitchell, who left, is participating, Ms. Torres, and we are working to pull something together on the Assembly side that we can talk about a little more in the coming weeks. But we're very familiar with the concerns that people have related to the loss of those housing dollars. We are very aware of the concern around the tools of redevelopment, particularly economic development, and ways to move forward with that. So I want to let you know there are things, a lot happening on how to address some of those issues. The permanent source of funding has been a discussion for, I remember hearing about it when I was on the City Council in San Diego, and I know it continues to be an issue that some of us would like to see happen and figure out a way, and when is the right time to bring that issue forward if it requires public vote and support from communities to put money into a permanent source that flows. Say what you mean. Tell me a little bit more
our
about
federal representatives too. Really, I mean, I think that's always been something that's haunted us. Is that while there is a federal response, it needs to be at least be a little more intense, and we need some champions in the Congress, whoever represents San Diego, whoever represents San Francisco. I mean, this is a national issue. So I mean that's another dominion to involve in a very hands-on way. And one thing maybe you wanted to talk a little bit about, because the cap and trade issue, because that did come up, and I don't know if there's a little diciness around that in terms of the interpretation. I read one thing where the LAO said that's just how we do budgets. We didn't necessarily move cap and trade over to home. So I don't know if there's any clarification there.
Well, and of course,
it's new to me. So
it's new revenue, and I think that when you get into a discussion about new revenues, if anyone can make a link or a nexus to the funding, they do that. How real or direct that link or nexus is, I think you're going to see some discussions about that. I think they're going to be legislative discussions. I think it's going to pop up at various committees and hearings. Certainly when you look at what the needs are, and the permanent source or a source of funding for housing. And I know that a lot of these conversations are very public conversations, so I don't think I'm sharing something that a number of people up and down the state don't know. We know that the head of Cal FHA, Claudia Capio, has been doing meetings up and down the state talking to people about the cost of housing. Because one of the big issues, we as affordable housing advocates, those of us who claim to be and are proud of being affordable housing advocates, know that a big issue has become the cost of affordable housing and what goes into it. And we've had reporters call us, and I spent an hour on the phone, and what I said didn't seem to come back to me the way I said it, and it just, we've got to get at the cost of housing, and I know that that's an effort that she is undertaking with communities, because as we talk about a source, it's kind of hard. What I've heard, it's kind of hard to make the case for an ongoing source of funding if people think the cost of housing is so high that you don't get a lot of bang for your buck, and people don't spend the time that we do thinking about this. And saying, well, here's what goes into the cost of housing and why it's important. There's services, and communities have expectations, and the cost of land and all kinds of things. So I still think that we have to strategically figure out the best time to take that discussion forward. Unfortunately, we're at a period of time where all of the resources we had for housing, somehow between our bond money is drying up, coming to a close, even though we still have money left from 1C and 46. We've lost redevelopment affordable. Well, it was diminishing already in terms of the money for affordable housing. The Mental Health Services Act funding, Prop 63, was reduced and allocated differently. So, we've sort of lost everything all along the way, and with the federal government making cuts, because really many of our dollars were coming from the federal government. I'm not sure the state was doing as much as the federal government on reliable forms of dollars. And then you mentioned home funds and CDBG cuts. And we are always worried about the reduction of the number of Section 8 vouchers as we plead for an increase in the number of Veterans Administration housing vouchers. So we've got lots of moving parts. So you talked about, you mentioned in your recommendations cap and trade. You mentioned the redevelopment dissolution. There was one more that you mentioned that I thought we probably should respond to. Just come right back up and remind me of your. He can do it quicker than I can find it.
The third one was repurposing 1C.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And thank you, because that has been an ongoing discussion brought up a couple of times, which we're engaged in now as another thought. So we are working on all of your issues. I think probably the one that will be figured out within the coming weeks is that February 1st deadline, and moving that deadline for the dissolution. And conversations are ongoing about that, and we know time is short. So you'll see movement sooner on some of your recommendations one way or another, and then we have some short-term conversations about funding, and then we're going to have some longer-term conversations about how we retool and think about getting resources for housing going forward. Thank you for reminding me of that. Other comments on any of the bills? I am taking everything that we've gotten today and we'll turn it into a suggestion, and I will be reaching out to those of you on the committee to say, here's what we got. What do you think? Can we proceed in this way? And I can have those conversations with you. Today was to collect, and so if there are other points you want to make about particular pieces of legislation, new legislation.
Yes, in fact, I'd like to ask for the advice of this committee. I have a voluntary contribution proposal to fund Interagency Council on Homelessness, and this will be taken through contributions in the personal state income tax forms. And I was wondering if I can include that with AB 1167, the Interagency Council on Homelessness, and it will just have to go back through the committee. Or I can create a separate bill, and I just didn't know what to do with that one.
Go ahead, Ms.
Well, if I may, as you know, I think that's a great idea, of course. But as you know, there is a sort of stiff competition on being included on the income tax form. And I believe there are now 15 checkoffs that if they continue to receive $250,000 in voluntary contributions, they remain. So it's only if the existing ones drop to under $250,000. I know because the Alzheimer's Research Fund is one of them. And so, you know, it could be done, but I believe we also heard in last session there were 2 or 3 other voluntary checkoffs, but it's always good. It's always good to put it in the mix.
Yeah.
Right.
It is limited, I believe, to 15 checkoffs at the moment, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody from Revenue Tax or somebody will be listening.
Well, we can look at that.
But just go for it, I'd say.
All right. Separate bill?
Because separate bill would mean you're going to start back up.
Back up?
Yeah. Because if you try to amend it, it's already in Senate appropriations. They probably, I don't know.
Okay.
We can talk about. We won't reveal our strategy here in committee.
But it
Since
will
we
become,
understand
it will
the
become
Senate
clear.
is watching.
It will become clear. Okay. Just personally, I am proceeding, of course, my 2-year bill, 826, on mental health issues and parolees in corrections. We'll be proceeding with that bill. I'm actually going to introduce another bill that I wish I had done last year, but I was a new legislator, and I took that discussion seriously about you can't spend any money. I am going to proceed. Yeah, right. I'm going to proceed with, well, of course, then somebody keys my bills as costing money, even if I made the case that, well, this doesn't really cost money, but whatever. I'm new. I had to learn. But I am going to present and go forward with my California identification bill for people leaving prison. I know other people have done that in the past. Obviously, has not been successful, but I am going to proceed with that because law enforcement on the ground and social service agencies have said that that's a critical piece of someone having identification is one step that is helpful.
Also, if you need co-authors or sponsors or whatever the terminology.
Thank you, and likewise to my colleagues as you put forward legislation.
I think outreach, the kind of outreach we're doing to the governor's office, it's a little murky, and maybe a concentrated effort there, or even a meeting with him in and around the issue. I know that he's interested, but I don't know if it's obviously with everything else, the front burner. And he has some very competent people down there in the horseshoe. And if there was a point person,
Right.
that kind of thing, I think that might help with access as well.
Other thoughts? I want to thank everybody for participating today, and this is really an enjoyable committee, and I think mostly because the people who are on it really want to be here and make an effort to come and to contribute. I want to thank our partners. We really count on you to help us proceed forward, and as we know that as we put legislation forward, that we can count on you to help us. We're talking to our colleagues, but we know that you're there to help us. And I am really looking forward to getting an update, and we'll work with the Department of Veteran Affairs because I am really, again, I'm going to say it and be repetitive, impressed with what you've been able to do in this last year. and we'll find a way to participate along with Colonel Cook on the Veterans Council. And I just want to thank all of you. And lastly, again, I want to acknowledge and thank Matthew for actually working hard to get our report done. And with that, and Lindsay, of course, she's front and center. Thank you, Ms. Yamada. But we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.